Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to this edition of What Happens Next, the show where we explore the challenges we often face when we get to the stage of our lives and we're thinking, there might be more to this sort of thing, and I want to explore it. I really pleased to have on today somebody I consider a friend, somebody who's incredibly cheeky, so expect a bit of that throughout this interview, but somebody who's also got some really interesting and unique insights, not only from his life experience, but also from the work he does. He's a bloke called Justin. Hello, Justin. How you doing, mate?
Hi, it's a bloke called Justin. Yeah, nice to see you, Chris, and thank you very much for that delightful welcome. And I'll try not to be too cheeky.
It's a pleasure, mate. It's great to have you on. I know that we're likely to have a massively insightful conversation for the people watching. I know all about you, but for those in our audience who don't, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm Justin Walton. I'm a father of 2 adult children. I've got Gemma and Alex. Married to Wendy, and dog dad to little Isla, a little black cockapoo. What do I do for a living? I'm a coach and a consultant, and I primarily work with people in their late 40s and 50s. Hence why I guess Chris has got me on this. Looking at how we can help transition them and transform their lives from one of work and career to one of, to use your phrase, Chris, what happens next?
Yeah, love that. And when you're thinking about that transition in people's lives, what themes generally come up?
Fear is probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
You know, I think because we wear a badge, don't we? We wear a badge that says I'm a whatever. In my case, prior to the transition, that badge was one of as a tax advisor. I was a chartered tax advisor practicing, and there is a fear, I think, that goes with giving up these badges that we've accumulated throughout our working lives, whether they're badges that we wear with a working hat on, or whether they're badges that we wear outside of work. So I would say fear is probably step one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Cassie and I were chatting the other day, actually, about that change in identity. Because as you know, Charlotte's grown up. We haven't got 2 adult kids. We've got 1 adult child and one who's maybe the cheekiest person I know, even cheekier than you, Sophie, who it reminded me the other day. We went to a wedding of a friend, and they had these little pegs that they had on all the food, and she thought it'd be really funny to take those pegs and peg them onto the back of my suit. And she literally got all of my friends and her involved in doing that. And it's brilliant. But the question that I'd ask is, and the conversation I've been having with Kat recently, is that transition from parenting young kids to parenting teenagers, and then to see the kids go, because that's a shift in identity as well. How do you think people navigate that successfully?
Oh wow! I mean, that is a big question, and I think when I talk about fear, I then talked about it in the context of career. But you're absolutely right. You know, if I remember back to when my eldest was going off to university, and you know, obviously that was really exciting. You know, she just had her 18th birthday. That was really exciting. But there was also a massive element for me of this is the unknown now we're stepping into. It's super exciting for her. For us as her parents, it's a big change. I remember, you know, I'm probably not alone, and I'm certainly not ashamed to say that we dropped her at university, and I cried. You know, it was for me, it was actually an exciting, sad moment, and that's a massive contradiction. But that realization that actually things are changing, and for some, a lot of those changes come in pretty close succession. For us, they did. and it was a particularly challenging time for us, as you well know. But even if they come singularly and with time between them, it's a lot. I think it's a lot to take on. You've got to be a special kind of person not to be affected.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really interesting phrase you use. That sort of exciting but scary or sad. Do you think the transition when we're going into the next chapter of our lives and we're getting rid of some of those identities can be both scary and exciting? What do you think?
For me, it's been massively exciting. I think, I don't know what it was like for you, Chris, when you were kind of, going through your, the earlier stages of your career. Obviously, we've spoken about some of the details there, but for me, when were the really exciting points in my life? It's when there's challenge, it's when there's change, it's when there's something new coming, it's when those things aren't happening, it's kind of nice, but it's also kind of a little bit boring.
Samey, right?
So it's samey, and I'm the sort of person that likes to do different things, as you well know, and likes to try different things, and some of these things work and some of them don't work, but the fact is, in doing that creates some level of excitement, and whether it's during your career or when you're getting to the point of moving on from that, I think having things that excite you in your life is no bad thing.
It's so interesting as well, because I think often when clients are speaking to us about getting clarity on where their plan is, a consistent theme when I think about the conversations I have with clients is they're a bit bored of what they're doing at the minute. It might not be painful, it's scary on the other side, but a motivation might be, I'm not enjoying it anymore, and I don't see me doing it for another 10 years. Justin, you've talked a bit about your own journey into the next chapter. Help me understand, and our audience understand a little bit more about that. What did you learn? What were the easy and hard bits? And what surprised you the most about taking that trip?
Okay, thank you. So just kind of rewinding, I mentioned I spent most of my career as a chartered tax advisor. So the first 17 years or so, I worked in the accountancy profession. I worked for one of the big four firms, KPMG. I worked for another large global firm, BDO, and a city kind of regional firm. And then I moved from there to industry, where I spent 10 years and ultimately became the group head of tax, responsible for strategy and advisory and compliance for what was a FTSE 250 business. The big change, first change, I guess, if you like, for me was at the end of those 10 years. So that was a business that was really exciting, growing, ticked a lot of boxes for me, but it also came with a realization that I didn't want to be there forever. And as I was approaching my mid-40s, the business was about to go through an IPO, and I realized I didn't want to be around the business in the next stage of its life. That was my opportunity to do something that I'd always wanted to do, which was to work for myself. So I took that opportunity to work for myself after 10 years and after the IPO. And I guess that was the first scary thing professionally that I'd done, taking that leap. So in some ways, I'm mentioning it because in some ways that helped me prepare for what happened next in my life. So I worked for myself as a tax advisor for the next 8 years, and those 8 years were particularly challenging personally. I've already mentioned, my daughter going off to university. We lost 3 of our parents over that period of time, which was incredibly sad and incredibly challenging. All at the time when I was going through an exciting stage of building my own business, if you like. But what that time helped me realize was that even though I was doing that and that was the right thing for me to be doing, it actually wasn't what I wanted to be doing. It helped me realize that I wanted to be doing something else. And at the time, I didn't really know what that something else was. until we were on holiday with some friends in the swimming pool a few years back, and we got on to talking about coaching and helping people and helping them understand some of these transformations, helping them unearth their own treasures that are deep within themselves, and which without that support, it's really, really hard to kind of put your arms around and really try and understand yourself. My wife Wendy, she'd already been to Henley Business School and trained as an exec coach as part of her winding down from what was a really significant and stressful career, and it was a point when I realised that that's what I wanted to do too, and so that gave me something to kind of hang on to. Since then, I've developed that skill set of coaching, from working with executives and leaders and teams into more around money and money habits. Yeah. And also I've actually now developed that into something that's much more holistic around this kind of transformation that we're talking about at the moment. And that's given me something that's exciting. It's also given me an opportunity to share my lived experience and build on my lived experience, but also build on that expertise, if you like, that I've developed as a coach. Yeah. What have I found easier? Coming from the background that I come from, the numbers. I mean, that's something that it wouldn't surprise you to learn. We've had a lot of sharp focus on for a really long time. Sure. But getting that sharp focus and getting it to a point where actually you feel brave enough to step away from earning really, really well and taking brave steps. And, that could include changing career. It could include setting up a new business. It could include, stepping on a golf course or going on a cruise ship. It could be all of those things. But for us, and we all know the book around enough, actually understanding what our number is, actually understanding our numbers, that was probably the easy bit for us.
I mean, we'll talk about this a bit later on, but it's the understanding and the emotions around it are two different things, right?
Yeah, and that's the bit. So the logical bit was easy. The emotional bit was much, much harder. And and it is still something that coming from that background, it's still something that we think about, even today, even though we know what the answers are, even though that we coach people around this subject, it's still something that you just have to look in the mirror every now and again and just remind yourself that it is fine. So
I it's really interesting. I had a coaching session with my coach yesterday, and a couple of things came up. Number one, you still have to continue to look in the mirror, right? There's no done. It's all a work in progress and a journey of learning. And one thing that I've dropped, an habit that I'm going to start, I did it a lot last year, and for some reason I haven't done it this year, and I found it really better, is journaling. Just thinking about, just spending 10, 15 minutes a day thinking about what I want to do. Here's the bit that I want to explore though. Revelations in the swimming pool, right? So I'm not going to ask what other revelations you've had in the swimming pool, clearly. But
now it's being cheeky, yeah.
But here's the interesting thing, and I've been thinking about this a bit. Do we need often to be out of that environment to actually realise what we actually want to do? And how much of our decision making do you think is environmental, and what can people do? I'm thinking of a client, a really good guy, runs a construction business, spends every day at work, and then goes away and has some thinking time to appreciate where he is, probably around a pool. So how much does environment have an impact in terms of our decision making, and how do we make sure that we're taking the time to change that environment?
Personally speaking, I'd say it's a massive impact. If I think back to my time as a tax advisor, my best strategic thinking, my best thinking around the family, where we were going, where we were headed, was always done on holiday. There wasn't space in my working life back then there wasn't space to think about this stuff in any serious and meaningful way. So, you know, at the time, that first week of a 2-week holiday was spent winding down and trying to relax and, you know, come off the adrenaline that, you know, had been built up over a long period of time. And it was always that second week where the kind of real thinking started to kick in. And even now that, you know, it's 10 years ago that I left that world, even now I do my best thinking when I'm not in the office. You know, it's when I'm walking the dog, it's when we go away. You know, I like to take myself away, and, you know, I am a thinker, so I like to take myself away and think. I mean, that's not for everybody, but for me, I think it's massive environment.
It's creating that space in their lives, isn't it? Is really important, I think, and I'm the same as you in that regard. So you talked a little bit about the work that you've been doing more recently about helping people with their relationship with money. Where did your interest in that sort of work specifically start?
Professionally, a few years ago. Personally, probably when I was a teenager. I've always been interested in money habits. I've always been interested in why people do what they do, why some people can, you know, create opportunity and options with money, and other people actually really struggle with it. You know, I've always believed that money's a tool. It's no more than that. And how you use that tool is like any tool. You need to find the right purpose for it. And yes, it's fascinated me for a long time how people can weaponize money, can use it for pleasure, you know, weaponize it for them, you know, against themselves as well as potentially against other people. So really trying to, I guess, dig into that is really important. Professionally, you know, I did my exec coaching qualification at Henley Business School, and then soon after that, I realised that I wanted to then extend that into money coaching. And I know you've had the fabulous Catherine Morgan on the show before. You know, I went through her financial coaching program, which was brilliant. There's a lot of really good insight in that. But for me, it's not about one or other of these things. It's about blending it all together. That's where my value kicks in. It's being able to look in a holistic way at transformation and transition and help people find that treasure that sits inside them.
And I think it's interesting when you think about it, Justin, because these are all moving parts, right? You know, it's that element. I had a conversation with a doctor of positive psychology yesterday who's coming on the show, and she was reading a book on the transition into what happens next that she wasn't enjoying particularly. And she said to me, the challenge with a lot of what's written about this transition is it's one-dimensional. You know, it's from a perspective that just looks at the money or just looks at, and the reality is the challenge is multifaceted, right? Do you agree?
I completely agree. Agree.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think one of the subjects that isn't explored in a lot of depth, but I know you've written about in your blog while I was doing my research, is fulfillment.
Yeah.
So how do we, I love that topic. It's a really fascinating one. What's the first practical step do you think we can take to work out where we are from a fulfillment perspective and the steps we can take to be more fulfilled?
I think it's a really interesting subject, fulfillment, because I get the sense that most people are, they just don't know it.
Yeah.
That kind of self-awareness around what fulfills them is beneath the surface, and it needs kind of pulling out. And, you know, coming back to coaching, that's what good coaches do, isn't it? They find a way to pull these things out of people and to help them with their journey of self-awareness and self-discovery. So I think for most people that fulfillment is probably there, and it's the help they need to realize that.
Yeah.
Because once they've realized that, then you can really start to work on it. So let's take kind of meaning as a concept, and, you know, what's your purpose going to be when you decide that you're going to give up on your career and you're going to do something else? And, you know, because you still need one, right? You still need to get out of bed in the morning and have a reason for getting out of bed in the morning, and living a fulfilled day. And I think for most people, they've probably got in the back of their mind somewhere or deep inside them what they'd love to be doing at that point in time, but it's been buried beneath the day-to-day noise. It's been buried beneath bringing family up. It's been buried beneath developing that career, and it just needs a bit of help to be kind of uncovered. And so I think it's really as much around self-discovery and self-awareness as it is around actually being fulfilled. It's finding what that fulfillment is for you.
For me, it's that eudaimonia, isn't it? It's that eudaimotic well-being. And as much as I love to play paddle tennis, I think playing paddle tennis 24/7 is not going to meet my eudaimonic needs. It's just plain and simple. But the interesting thing about that is the pain often you've got to go through. And I've used pain in a sort of broad context, but sometimes it's that element of it's just easier to stay with the status quo, isn't it? So what journey do you need to go on personally to get to a point where you go, right, I need to make positive change?
I think sadly for a lot of people, something happens to them in their lives. That nudges that thinking, because I completely agree with you. For most people, the status quo is probably not a bad place to be. It probably wasn't a bad place for us to be. Going back, you kind of know where you're at. Everything's in a pretty good rhythm. I use the word rhythm quite a lot in our lives at the moment. Having that kind of sense of rhythm, I think, is really important. So just being able to recognize when that nudge is there. For us, as I said, it was almost a sad nudge. It was a realization that we had 3 sick parents that passed in fairly short order, and it wasn't the realization that time's short so much. It was the realization that we've had really good careers. What can we do next? How can we enjoy our lives more, and not wait for that enjoyment, not kick that can down the road, which I think is what a lot of people might do, particularly if you're in a job or a business where it's successful, you're earning well, the check keeps coming in, the dividends keep getting paid or whatever. I think emotionally it's quite hard for people to ignore that. But I'm also a believer in stepping out when you're at the top of your game, not when you're on the cliff falling down. And that in itself is also really, really hard. I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Do you think people wait too long?
Some people, I think, wait too long. For the reasons that we've just said.
How do you know when there's the right time to exit?
I think people, again, it comes back to nudging, doesn't it? I think people get nudged into exit. They'll get the phone call with that offer that they can't refuse, but they've not even really thought about the exit up until that point. Or the business starts to go downhill because economies change, and markets change, or people change, or whatever it is. Something kind of happens. Being brave to actually look ahead and say, do you know what, I want to do this, and this is when I want to do it, and this is what it's going to look like. That takes effort.
I mean, it's really interesting because there's a video coming out on What Happens Next where it talks about the concepts of memento mori and thinking about how that applies to our life. Because I think the changes that I've made in my life over the last 5 years, 5 and a bit, is when my mum passed in 2019. And actually, I think that framed my life in a different way, so that the balance, the rhythm of my life now is completely different to what it was then. And I think you go through those stages in life. Sometimes you're working really hard in the business and there's certain things that are more prominent, and then you've got to think about what the right balance is for you. But the interesting thing there is, and we've highlighted it in this conversation, often people think that what happens next model is a movement from meaning and purpose through work to just stopping, relaxing, enjoying it. And actually, you still need a bit of meaning and purpose. It just evolves over time. How do we get better at finding that meaning and purpose at the next stage of our lives?
I think it's going back to something I said earlier. It's about giving yourself space to think about actually what's important to you and what you want to do next. And it's very easy for me to say as a coach, because that's essentially what we do. We help people find that space and then start to explore that space. But you know, whether it's the next time you go on holiday or the next time you step away from your business or your work, you know, that's probably the time to just ask yourself that question of, you know, if I had to finish doing what I'm doing right now, tomorrow, next year, 5 years time, what might I do instead? What might I do instead? And start to think about those things, because it's not good enough just to say it's going to be X. You need to add some fat to that. You need to, because otherwise it's just a list, right? So being able to not only identify it, but then conceptualize it and then act on it. Yeah, if you like, that's the steps that people need to go through. But it all starts with that initial thinking.
If I stop today, what would I do next?
Yeah,
and then in what time frame do I want to move towards that life, right? You know, that's relative. Now, I know you use a really useful framework that I love, and I know you've talked about quite a lot, called Align, to help your clients. What is Align? How does it work, and how does it apply to people thinking about transitioning their lives?
So Align is a coaching framework that I've developed, and it's about looking at things holistically. And you know, that phrase can sometimes seem a bit naff, but that tends to be because there isn't any color around it. So I've put some color around it by developing the framework Align. And essentially what Align is, it's looking at 6 M's. I call them the 6 M's. There is a 7th M, which is essentially midlife, but that's almost taken as read. But the 6 M's are meaning, money, mind, membership, movement, and momentum. And what I've come to realize over my career and from talking to friends, to clients, is that when those 6 M's are all in pretty good alignment, we tend to be quite happy. We tend to be in a pretty good place. We tend to be able to see the future, plan, get stuff done, be in the moment. If one of those M's is a little bit out of kilter, we're still probably fine. But as you start to see 2 or 3 of those M's fall out of kilter, that's when, for me, the challenges start to come. As you know, I did some work with a men's mental health charity over the last few years. And when guys turned up at the meetings and talk about what's going on, typically it's when there's multiple things happening in their lives, or one really, really big disaster that's happening in their life, that tends to be where their real challenges come in. And I get, you know, that's where mind comes. That's where the mind, the M for mind, comes in. It's, you know, being able to be fairly level with yourself, being able to, you know, see things with clarity. So that's the essence of it. It's you know, it's not like I sit down and I necessarily work through each M consecutively. It's more fluid than that. But the essence of it is to help people explore those with a view to seeing what their alignment looks like, not just now, but obviously in the future as well. So
that I want to dig a bit deeper into a few of the M's. The first one I want to start with is midlife, right? So I turned 48 a couple of weeks ago.
No, you didn't.
I've had an hard life. That's what I can say. I turned 48 a couple of weeks ago, and somebody got me a brilliant card that said, old enough to know better, young enough to do it anyway. And I think I'm in a bit of denial, to be frank, Justin. Like, when does midlife start, end? And at what point do we need to think about the next chapter? I mean, I think about the next chapter of my life, despite it being a bit of a way away, because I'm doing this work. But what is midlife? How do we define it? And how can we make it practical and useful when we're thinking about our next chapter?
I think that's a really good question. And the reason I haven't got 7 M's is because I think it's a really difficult question to answer. It's quite personal. You know, you probably would say, if you were looking for a kind of an age description, it's probably somewhere between the ages of kind of 45 and maybe 60, 65. And I think for most people that probably is right. But for me, it's really about that stage in your life when things start to change, when the stability starts to get rocked. You know, maybe the kind of sandwich generation type things kick in, or, you know, children getting older, parents starting to, you know, suffer with ill health, changes going on at work. Maybe you're, you know, reaching the pinnacle of your career, you know, probably earning the best money that you've earned in your lifetime up until that point in time. That stage where you kind of, I guess an analogy is you're getting towards the top of the mountain in your life in terms of what things are looking like and how successful they look for you. So it's that point that I really start to look at and work with people. If I think about my own life, the money side of it, we really started to properly hone in on just after our 40th birthdays, and start to think about, actually, we can't keep on spending and spending and spending and having lots of fun and doing all these things if we want to have choices when we reach our early mid 50s. I mean, we can, but the choices will be reduced unless pay continues to go up, or, you know, so something has to give in that. As far as if we're thinking about money, to my mind, something has to give. The realization for me was when my dad had a reasonable career in working in banking. Everything seemed to be fine. He was pretty happy, and he then, around about his mid 40s, early 50s, was hit with 3 or 4 redundancies in pretty quick succession. And all of a sudden he went from stability, feeling like he was in control, to actually feeling rudderless. So that was always something that I held in the back of my mind from when the age when that happened, that I kind of didn't want to be in that situation myself. I wanted to have a bit more control is probably not the right word, but a bit more protection, choice, opportunity. It's one of the reasons I gave up that the best job, if you like, that I, in terms of seniority, that I'd had in my mid 40s. I could have stuck it out. Could have probably stuck it out for another 10 or 20 years, but I chose not to.
But having I think when it comes to the money, having the clarity of where you are gives you options, doesn't it? And the options might be, I need to do something about it. The options are, I've already got built enough wealth that I've got the choice. But that element of clarity and your perspective that I know we share, of money is a tool to live the life you want, helps them reframe it in a way that gives you those options. Because one choice might have been, I'm going to carry on spending the way I was spending, but as long as you were aware of the implications of that being, actually, you've not got the freedom to make some of the choices you've done later in your career. So it's that element of give and take that I think sometimes you just, we all need to just have more clarity and better conversations about. One really interesting thing is, I think there's certain M's that we struggle with more than others. What M's for the work that you're doing comes up as themes that people struggle with time and time again?
Probably won't surprise you to learn meaning is one of them. Giving up that corporate badge or that role badge or that family badge, and knowing what's next. I think a lot of people struggle with that, particularly in that transition when those things are starting to fade, as the kids are going off to university or into the world of work. Because, if you think back to our parents' generation, massive generalization, but the model was essentially you start work in your mid-teens, and you carry on working often for the same organization for the next 40 odd years, and then you retire, and then you maybe have some nice holidays and you play golf, and then you pass on. And
it was that learn, earn and rest model.
Exactly right.
That learner, and I'm not convinced. I mean, it's interesting. I've doing a lot of writing at the minute for the What Happens Next book that's coming out next year. I'm thinking about this quite a lot. I'm not sure that model worked for that generation particularly well anyway, but at least it was a track, right? At least it was a track people could run on. And I think it might be the first time that I've ever quoted Back to the Future on What Happens Next. But where we're going, we don't need roads. We could do with some, couldn't we? We could do with a track to run on, but it gets. There's an amazing book about this particular subject called The Paradox of Choice by a guy called Barry J. Schwartz. And he talks about the fact that in the modern world, one of the things that we're really blessed with is as much choice as we can have, but often having unlimited choice is quite a challenge psychologically, because what do we do then? How do we make those definitive decisions when we know that everything is potentially possible? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that, and that goes back to people sticking with the status quo, right? If you've got multiple choices, if you've got lots of options, people being people tend to find it easier to stick with what, particularly if everything is okay. Particularly fine.
Isn't it?
It's that. It's almost a paralysis, I suppose.
Yeah.
But that kind of brings in another kind of notion that that's funny. I was talking to my wife Wendy last night about. I always used to use this phrase around conscious decision making, and I realised I've kind of left it behind a little bit in the last few years. But for me, that's what's really important in this. It's consciously deciding to do what you do. And yes, you might have multiple choices, but consciously work through what those options are, and find what will work for you, and accept that some of those things might not. Accept that actually the fun's in the learning as well as in where you end up.
I mean, it's something to talk about What Happens Next on What Happens Next a lot. That element of it hasn't got to be all or nothing. Actually, the experiments that you create in your life can be incremental, and we can turn around and go, well, do I like that? Do I want to do that more? Do I want to, one perfect example is me coming to the Court Talk every month, which I do because I love it. But if I didn't, I could have tried it once and never come back again. And it's that element of turning around and go, what can I experiment with in my life where I can go, you know what, let's give that a go, see if I like it, see if I don't. And if I do like it, do I do more of it? One thing we talk to our clients about quite a lot is the concept of the retirement cliff versus the retirement flight path, and saying some of us can turn around and go, right, I'm doing something else, and just make that change. But for a lot of us, actually making incremental change, working less over time, provides potentially a bit more headspace, but also it's less scary to make that change. What do you think about that idea of incremental change versus fundamental change? And what's the first tiny step somebody might take when thinking about experimenting with What Happens Next?
Well, firstly, thank you for plugging Business Uncorked, which you didn't quite do, but
all I said was I love it.
The essence, but the essence of that for me goes back to the M of membership. It's about
community, right?
Having unity, having a I use the word cautiously, having a tribe, having kind of people that you like to spend time with, enjoy spending time with, and being able to step into that space without fear, and acknowledging that I think most people that go to that event are in a very similar boat, actually. I know there are some exceptions, but most are in a very similar boat, where they have choices over how they spend their time, choices over who they spend their time with, choices over how they spend their money, and yet they all turn up on to the events for their own personal reasons. I think the point about incremental change is a really important one, because if I go back to the example of my dad, he had a real change to make when he was made redundant. People that are selling their businesses, there's a real change to make when they step out of selling their businesses. And often what you see in that scenario is there's, and I've worked for organizations that bought and sold businesses. That was my career, if you like, for a long time. And there's a lead up to that, and that lead up tends to be very logical. It's about collecting information. It's about thinking about structures. It's about thinking about organization. It's about thinking about people. And rarely what it thinks about is the emotions that go with any of those things. And rarely what it thinks about is what happens next. You're selling your business. At what point do you start to think what your life might actually look like afterwards, so that it doesn't become a cliff edge? Now, you might consciously decide that you're going to take 2 or 3 months of having those wonderful holidays and spending time with people that you want. But once you've got through that kind of honeymoon period, having a flight path, I think, is really important.
I agree. But I mean, the interesting thing, as you say, when people are doing that, and what I'm an advocate of is people thinking about it maybe 3 to 5 years before they're thinking about selling, so that they can just factor in those elements. Now, clearly, not everybody does. Everybody's got their own sort of journey through it. But I think the earlier we can start to think, plan, and prepare, the better. I've experienced coaching and benefited from coaching in my life. But for those of us who watching this who haven't had a coaching relationship before, explain a little bit about how it works.
So coaching is on a spectrum, I would say, of kind of interventions that can support self-discovery and self-awareness. And the things that I would include within that spectrum, at one end would be something like therapy, which is very much around looking into things that happened to you in the past and trying to find ways of accepting those and moving on from those things. At another end of the spectrum might be something like mentoring, where you're pulling on the real experience of somebody that's walked your shoes before you, that you can really learn from. That tends to be very much a kind of a tell type relationship, where the mentor is doing a lot of the talking. Coaching sits somewhere in the middle for me. Coaching is very much around, the role of the coach is to actively listen. The role of the coach is to pull out themes that they're hearing, to help the coachee, the client, kind of get some clarity and see where they might go next, and really start to dig deep into, their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, things that will have an impact. And the main difference between coaching and therapy is that coaching is very much about forward looking. It's about accepting where we are now and how can we, in an executive sense, perform better in the future, or remediate a problem that currently exists that we need to be better at. But in a life sense, it's about living our best life in the future. We're not looking to necessarily fix things that aren't quite right. We're looking to, so a coaching session would, you can do super fast coaching. There's some really good super fast techniques to do really short sessions, but they tend to be more interventionist. If you're looking at something like we're talking about today, you'd probably be looking at anything between a 60 and 120-minute session. You would typically be looking at somewhere between 3 and 6 sessions to work through the situation that you've got, and would typically at the end of that call time on that relationship for now until the next thing comes up. Again, I contrast that with mentoring, which tends to be a much more enduring relationship. So coaching is really about trying to focus on that particular matter, issue, problem, solution. That
interesting.
And in this context, it is, the the problem of what happens next, if you like.
Um,
So that's. Yeah.
I suppose the interesting question for me is what makes the right coach for you, and then when you're thinking about a coaching relationship, what should you be looking for to make sure you've got the right coach?
It's a great question. One of the things they were very clear on at Henley was that personal fit is really important. Not every coach is going to work for every person. So having those initial get to know you sessions, having time to really see that the coach gets you and that you get the coach. I'm not necessarily talking about over a massively extended period, but just seeing that
making sure there's a fit,
right?
Help
you. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really important. I think stepping into a coaching relationship blind is, it may work, but it's more likely not to.
You said something really interesting when you were talking about coaching in terms of the difference between that element of performance coaching, which is particularly aimed at a sort of business goal, and that element of coaching to get more fulfillment in our lives. How has the way you see success in life changed? And what do you think the challenges people face in the next chapter of their lives?
That's a great question. I think it probably goes to the nub of what we're talking about. My take on that, if I look at my own situation, which is always the easiest place to start with this, is we build, don't we? We build from being young adults as we progress through our 30s and our 40s. We build our careers, we build our businesses, we build our lives, we build our friendship groups, we grow, our families, we're building our families. All of these things are about building, and with anything that's being built, it kind of just gets bigger, right? And so what we're talking about here is we've kind of got to the point where we feel comfortable enough that we've built everything we want to build, and now we want to live there.
Yeah.
And we want to enjoy what we've built. We want to enjoy the fruits of what we built. We want to enjoy the education that we've had, the work experience and lived experience that we've had, the time we've spent with people, and we want to do it on our own terms. And that, I think, is really what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's instead of that future focus, how do we live more in now? And that's a really fascinating topic. Now I know that one thing that I think about quite a lot is becoming a little more capable of managing the challenges in my life. I'm trying to avoid the word resilience because you're not keen on that, are you? I don't think, but often becoming more capable of rising to challenges is something I think about. What can we do practically to just get better at managing the challenges in our lives?
I think it comes back to what I started with, Chris. It's that self-awareness. It's understanding ourselves better. It's cutting out the noise and actually spending time on ourselves and really getting to know ourselves. We have this kind of transient relationship with ourselves when we're building, because there's so many other pulls and pushes on our time. And when you get to the stage of midlife, to call it that, you have a choice to make whether you continue to live that way or take a bit more control over what happens next and make those conscious decisions that will impact what happens next.
And it's been about it's having a bit more reflection about what the next stage looks like, I think. So I want to go back to fulfillment, and I'm going to give you a magic wand, Justin. What's the one thing you'd love people to realise about fulfillment to help people live better lives?
I strongly believe we all have all the answers. I strongly believe that. What we need, though, is some nudging, some safe space, some time to be able to really pull those out of ourselves. And I suppose that's what I want people to take away. It's an acknowledgement that it's all in there somewhere, and it is about that reflection. It is about allowing yourself the time to think about what is, at the end of the day, a really important subject.
Yeah, 100%. And tell me a little bit about because as you know, I love a story. What story best describes the work you do?
Oh gosh, right. That's the one you pulled out of the bag, isn't it? So what story best describes the work I do? I'm trying to think of a cartoon or a Disney, because they tend to be quite. I think it's that. Let's not name a story. Let's just think about it in the context of Disney. Of everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right, and that's the story I think that I probably come back to. If I put the effort in, it's all going to be okay.
I love that. If I put the effort in it, what Disney film's that? Or just all of them?
I'm just blending. As you know, I was in Disney a little while ago, so it's kind of, so I'm blending all of these kind of thoughts.
Yeah, everything. If I just try a bit, everything's going to be all right. It's not a bad philosophy to live life, is it?
Yeah, I don't think so.
But try a bit, everything's going to be all right. Tell us a little bit. I mean, I really poorly talked about Business Uncorked. So do you want to share a little bit about that, how that started and where it's going?
So Business Uncorked is as I said, it goes back to membership for me. You know, one of the things that I've always enjoyed doing, you know, throughout my life is hosting kind of smallish events of, you know, with like-minded people over a theme that they really enjoy. So, you know, back in the day, that used to be hosting discos. So I used to do some DJing back in the day. So we used to put some events on. More recently, I developed something called the Squash Club Business Network, and that was about getting people playing and learning together, a sport that not many people would regard as a popular sport these days. But it worked really well to get that connection going. So I suppose Business Uncorked for me is the next phase of that. And, you know, having done the music and done the sport, we're now into the wine and cheese. And I think that lends itself really well to the midlife demographic.
Wine, cheese and great conversation is what I always get from it. What I'm really interested in, though, is that disco part. Because what was the floor fillers that you used to always play that you used to get people up dancing?
Well, we were in the kind of genre of kind of house music, so that was our kind of anything that kind of came from that kind of Frankie Knuckles type era was what we were playing. We did obviously also, you know, I'm not making any great shakes about this. You're not going to find me in any big magazines or anything, but you know, so we did, you know, the birthdays and the weddings and the celebrations. But we used to have a regular event at a local pub, which was a bit of a forerunner for one of the clubs in the area. So people would come and, you know, have a few drinks in the pub. We'd be playing the music, and then they'd head off to see the real DJs. But that was all. That was always something that we loved doing.
And actually, I think that element of creating environments where people can have great conversations is something that should be applauded. So thank you for what you do on that. Tell us a little bit about the where people can find you, where in terms of the coaching element, and where can they find good resources and content based on what you've done.
Yeah, so I have a website. The website is justinwalton.co.uk. You'll find some really good tools, resources, scorecards, blogs. I earlier on this year started writing a day in the life of blog, so you can get to see a little bit about me. That's on a pause at the moment, but it will be coming back at some point. I don't want to overshare at the end of the day, but that you mentioned journaling earlier. That was my public journaling for a period of time, and I will come back to that. LinkedIn, of course, so look me up, Justin Walton, or my company page, which is Justin Walton Coaching and Consulting. Or if you're in the Southend area or happy to travel to Southend, come and see us at Business Uncorked. We're meeting on the 12th of September, 7th of November and the 12th of December.
Perfect. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for sharing your insights.
That's wonderful. And thank you for having me, Chris. I've thoroughly
Pleasure.
enjoyed it.